Welcome in, everyone. I'm Dr. Terry Wager, of course, and I'm here with my good friend Kevin back this week with his cool stash still. And what are we talking about today?
We are talking about we're talking about unhappy clients and what to do about it.
Yeah, and I think we've all had an unhappy client, and sometimes it's our fault, and sometimes it's not. And so, what's that like for you when you got unhappy clients? I know it doesn't happen often. Um, in fact, it's a rarity for you. So, uh,
Well, I mean, there's always stuff happens, but yeah, if clients unhappy. I mean, it's first, I think the overall theme of like if a client's unhappy, I think is really to make sure they feel heard and understood is step one. And then I think step two would be to articulate. Well,
oh,
I don't mean to be giving steps.
we're gonna
I'm
get right into how to fix it. But what is it
Oh,
like
okay. I'm
to
sorry.
have it and it just hits you though? Before we fix it, I mean, what is it
Oh,
like?
yeah, it
They
sucks.
call
I
you
mean,
up for help.
yeah, it sucks. I mean, it can be disheartening, and people are people. They have different levels of reactions, and I say reactions instead of responses because many times it's not a response; it's a reaction.
Yeah,
Um, but with that, um, gives you opportunity to solve it. And some of the best clients that you can have are ones that are unhappy at one point in the process, and then because you only it's great when things go perfectly, right? But that's easy. It's when things don't go perfectly and you handle them properly is where people really appreciate what you do.
I love that, and that is so true. And one of my skills that I have developed over the years is de-escalation and frustration and anger and aggression and de-escalating people in stressful situations. I worked in the prison system for 5 years and worked with severely emotionally disturbed kids for about 10 years before that. And I got really good at being able to go, okay, this is not about whatever they're saying it is. It's about whatever's going on inside of them. And if we think it's about what they're saying, we miss the mark and they actually get more frustrated because they're not feeling heard, like you said. And as a result, they're not feeling heard. They're getting more frustrated as they go because they got a lot of emotions bouncing off of themselves. And it starts to get uncontrollable if we don't think from much more of an emotional, intelligent place. Um, and here's the reality for all of us is when we get upset, our IQ drops, and if we get attacked, we'll get upset. And so when I say IQ, I mean our ability to think fast and be flexible and hear what's going on. Because what happens is all of our resources, if you ever watch Star Trek, this is a really kind of good analogy. If you haven't watched Star Trek, it's probably not as good. But when the spaceship is under attack, they take all of their energy and put it into their shields or their force field so that they don't get harmed. And that's what we do as human beings is we take all of our energy and put it into protecting ourselves if we're under attack. If somebody's in the attack mode, they're putting all of their energy into being heard or attacking, and they're not thinking about the other person. And so we have one person not thinking about the other person because they're in attack mode. We have the other person not thinking about the person attacking them because they're in protect mode, and there is no communication. And so if you got a client who's uh, having some kind of problem and then comes in attacking, we got to really step back and go, wait a minute, what's going on with me? And be able to have the emotional acuity, which is the ability to identify and the ability to understand what's going on with ourselves quickly in order to not get into that engagement in a way that really hurts the relationship further. And so, how do you do that?
Um, how do I do what exactly? Like manage like the issue?
Manage yourself first.
Well, I think being conscious of it is one step of it is like realizing it is something you can control. I feel like a lot of people don't realize that your response is something that can really de-escalate a situation,
Yeah.
like social modeling, that kind of thing. It's like you know, if you're the only one flipping out in a room full of people, and this helps with numbers too. If you have numbers, or there are other parties present, if you're the only one flipping out, you look more like an asshole. The client, even on like a subconscious level, the client will be like, okay. And like if everyone else is calm and you're the only one flipping out, you'll probably burn out pretty quick. But if you add fire to it, you start flipping out with the client, that's where things get unnecessarily ugly, and it just
It's interesting
reinforces
you
them.
say that, and it brings me back to and I don't know if anybody ever has watched The Dog Whisperer, but The Dog Whisperer, one of the ways he actually works with animals, um, is he'll bring them into his pack, because if they're acting out in some way, he'll bring the animal into his pack of dogs. He's got a big pack of dogs, and he lets the group of dogs retrain the behavior of the other dog. And that's kind of what you're talking about, is like people don't necessarily freak out in a crowd, or the whole
Right.
crowd freaks out and then they feel normal. But it's hard to have the same level of freak out, because we start worrying about what everybody's thinking, and so we use the crowd as a way to modulate. That's one of the reasons that people are like, hey, if I'm going to go and see this person and break up with them in a relationship, I'm going to do it in public. Like,
Right.
I won't have such the reaction. And it is good, but what happens if you can't do that?
Um, yeah. I mean, if you're unable to do that, I mean, you have to just be more cognizant of your own response, because just like the other person in a crowd, if you're in a calm crowd, you're more likely to be more calm.
Right?
But if it's just two people in a room, you have to just be more conscious of how you're acting. And also, I think being cognizant of your own ego and just understand like someone's flipping out, but it has nothing to do with me as a person. Don't
Yeah.
internalize it.
Yeah. And that truer words have never been spoken. However, it's not as easy as it sounds, too.
Right.
And I mean, it's really hard. And I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years or something like that. But it's very, very difficult to not get triggered when somebody's attacking you, or your work product, or your what we see as our integrity, or our our pride. When somebody starts attacking that, we take it personally. And I actually have a chapter that I wrote, you know business is simple, people are complicated. And in that, I talk about the idea of business being personal. And business is personal because we're involved in it. And when we're involved in it, it's very difficult if somebody starts saying, hey, you're doing something wrong. It's also difficult if you have a client and they ghost you. It's like, hey, I want to get mad here, but that's not going to actually do anything. And so, how do we actually bring it back to the matter at hand? And quite often, um, it starts with really identifying what's going on with me now that I'm triggered. And we got to step back. And I was talking to another friend of mine yesterday about the idea of living in the observer role instead of the subjective participant role. And I, as a psychologist, have been uh, really trained to be much more an observer participant. And so, even though I'm participating in whatever's going on, I'm also much more focused on the observer and what is going on with this person, or what is going on with this interaction, or what is going on from this type of situation. And then being able, as the observer, to start attempting inroads to make a change. and sometimes it even works.
Who would have
Sometimes,
thought?
what's that? What's that?
I said, who would have thought?
Yeah. But and as the observer, and how and I think you've been doing this a while, and I mean, you had a really keen interest in psychology before you met me, but when you started working with me, you started taking some of those concepts of identifying your emotions when you're talking to people, and really being able to have that emotional acuity and regulate yourself much better, even if they're being uh, attacky, or if they're coming after you in some way. And I love watching the evolution of people into having much more emotional acuity. And the word that I was using earlier is, you got to walk in with compassion. And when we're compassionate, what happens is the other person experiences the compassion rather than the reaction. And from compassion, we can be curious, and we can ask really what's going on, because the person might be angry about something they were angry with yesterday, and we thought we solved, but they came back angry again. Well, it might not even be about the thing that we were talking about, but if we react now, we just undid what we did yesterday. And so compassionate, and for me, I'm like, okay, we resolved all of those things. Is there something else that we missed? Maybe it is the same issue. We just have to remind them, or we have to really do it again, because obviously we did it yesterday. We de-escalated. They're upset again today. Well, what's going on? What did we miss? Is there something else that you weren't talking about? Is there something else that you're feeling like uh, you didn't get to say, or you didn't feel heard? And I love that you said that. Often they don't feel heard. It's true. And in fact, sometimes we get upset because we didn't hear our own self.
A good frame too that I like that kind of helps is everyone wants to be understood. Everyone in general, including yourself, but like the real power comes in under putting the understanding of others above your own. So going into a situation, and because a lot of times I feel like people will go into that kind of situation, right? Let's say you're meeting with a client, you're like, all right, I need this client to understand me, where I'm coming
Yeah,
from. And that, in my opinion, is not the way to go. It's not the right mindset. I think going into it and being like, all right, let me try to understand where this person is, and then figure out how we can have a mutual agreement on the situation. But I think going in, it makes it easier. If you're focused on them, it makes you less focused on yourself, which
absolutely.
I think, helps lower that pressure. If you're just thinking about how you're reacting or how you should be acting or anything like that, it puts the pressure on yourself versus if you're focusing on them and trying to understand where they're coming from. I think you'll almost naturally uh, make them kind of feel better, right? Because if you're
Right.
not taking things personally, you're not getting all antsy yourself.
Absolutely. For me as a psychologist, um, all of my training has been around understanding the other person's experience, and then asking questions about it to gain that understanding. And when we go from that point of view, what happens is compassion absolutely comes out. But the other thing that happens is they have to start explaining it, because we're asking questions. And when we start asking questions of somebody who's upset, it actually, instead of engaging the drive to get what they want so that they're okay, it gets them to back up and start thinking and asking their own questions, because we just asked them a question, they have to answer it. And so it actually engages their mind. And even in just the asking a question about, okay, what is going on, they have to start thinking about what is going on instead of just exploding their point of view. And it's like, great, I want to get a little more background on it. Can you tell me a little bit where this is, or when did it show up, or What is it? What's different from today than yesterday when I thought we were settled? I must have missed something. And there's also such a power in de-escalating another person with saying, I must be wrong in somewhere. I'm not saying take the blame for everything, and I'm not saying be culpable for a mistake done in business, but I must be wrong in understanding where we're at. Help me to understand where you're coming from, and that allows them to go, oh, they'll take responsibility if they're wrong. And we didn't say anything about a job. We didn't say anything about what we did. We didn't say anything about what was purchased or done service wise or anything. Like, I must be wrong about what I was understanding. Help me to understand where you're coming from. And it's like you hit the brakes on a freight train when you do that. And they go, oh, well, okay, let me explain. Great, I want to hear.
And not to mention too, in the business world, it's a good opportunity for feedback to figure out where the frustration started. We actually just had a situation like this, um, like a couple days ago. We met with this client. This is a client we've been working with for a while. Really liked her. She's a sweetheart. She's doing this big addition in Westerly. We messed up on our initial like verbal estimate after we got into the details. Things changed, etc. Um, and she wanted to get some clarity on numbers and basically, which is fine to do. Long story short, she wanted us to deviate from our typical process to gain some clarity. And for most clients, it's not a good idea to do it with us, for a reason people don't understand what they're looking at in construction, whatever. Long story short is that this client felt extremely misunderstood to the point where she actually flipped out on us on a Zoom twice. And I'm like talking to her, and she actually, and she's a single woman currently. She's like retiring, and she actually thought we were being. So we basically went into these meetings not as prepared as we should have. We kind of winged it, and honestly, it was my fault because I was thinking we'd be able to. We had such a good relationship. I figured like a little bit of clarity, like we'd be able to land it. But it didn't work, and she thought we were doing that. She actually even mentioned like, "Is it because I'm a woman?" Something like. It was one of those things, and that, I'm not even thinking in that way, but it was one of those things where I kind of had to wrap my mind around where she was coming from, and Marissa was a huge help with that. But basically, so she came in for a meeting a couple days ago, and we were kind of getting ready for her. Like we didn't know where it was going to go. I mean, I was feeling hopeful about it, but I was like, we left off after like that arguing, and it almost seemed like there was a couple things that didn't go right afterwards. But um, anyway, what ended up happening, we had a great conversation, and we got into it, and she even gave us some feedback on where we kind of messed up, and we adjusted our process, added recaps, that kind of thing. There's basically a miscommunication along the way is where it all stemmed from. And but anyway, she's more than likely now going to be moving forward. In a couple of weeks we're set to sign contract, and so it was one of those things that it was kind of recovered. We fumbled it, and then but it was a situation with her, flipping out where she just wanted to be understood. And we actually like we talked about it. And we talked about like, her being a woman too, like, and it was a really informative
What was that
conversation.
like, having to address that in the moment like that when you weren't expecting it?
So this was when she said that. So we got off the Zoom call with everybody, and it was just a phone call with me and her separately right afterwards. And, she explained. But when she said it, yeah, I mean, I was taken off guard by it. Um, I basically like the way I operate personally, right or wrong, is I let people have their piece. Like just keep talking because they will. You know, I didn't take it personally, but I was definitely like, oh man, I fucked up somewhere. Like where did I mess up? And but yeah, I mean, I guess like my reaction. I mean, I've been doing it a long time, dealing with folks like in not the best situations, whether it's tenants, whatever. So I'm kind of I mean, people have said so much crazy shit to me. It's I'm probably not the best example at this point because I am very like neutral with it.
Well,
Um,
and here's the thing is I want you to slow that neutral thing down because nobody is.
right.
But you are used to it. So if you slow it down and roll it back, that first experience of the I'll say accusation is because I'm a woman. Um, that first inkling that I stepped in it. How did I feel embarrassed? Oh man, I did not think of that. And then how did I feel hurt? Well, she sees me as actually being the bully. How did I feel untrust? Oh wait, is this? Did I really come? Am I untrusting of me? Did I actually come across that way? Did I use a bias that I didn't know I was doing? How did I feel discouraged? I don't want to be that way, and I don't want to be perceived that way. And so a lot of emotion, and and I'm bringing that up especially using this example with Kevin, is because that's the questions we have to ask ourselves to regulate is how did I feel embarrassed? How did I feel hurt? Because the quicker we can answer those, the easier it is for us to get regulated again and go, whoa, I had a reaction. She's got one too. How is she feeling embarrassed? How is she feeling hurt? How is she feeling disconnected? Which is, if people want to feel understood, when they're not understood, they're feeling disconnected. And so, how did we make the mistake of helping her to feel disconnected when we want her to feel understood? And what is the next thing we can do to help her feel that way? And one thing that you're really good about is going, wow, I must have made a mistake here. And own that and go, okay, no, let's back up. You're right. I was wrong somewhere. Let's talk about it. And you may not use those words the way I just did, but you actually convey that message very well. And I really appreciate that about you, in that the ability to have those relationships and work through those situations because it's a skill.
I was gonna say a skill is probably a better word for it, but I was gonna say it's a strategy, right? Like you want people to be, to consider you on their side, on their team. We're not enemies here. That's the enemy, right?
Right.
This disconnect is the enemy. How do we solve this or this, this miscommunication or
That's so good.
whatever it is.
That's so good. And yeah,
That
and
separates us.
I like to say it's a skill to be able to do it. The strategy is to use the skill, right? And it's not a strategy to get over on anyone. It's a strategy to bring back the partnership if the partnership has been damaged, even if it's like a little fender bender damage.
Right.
It brings it back into no, we don't need to actually make it worse and drive through.
Like we're on the same side. Our interests are aligned. Like maybe we're on different teams, but we're on the same side. It's like let's solve this together.
Yeah,
I think that's a good kind of mindset to have, even going into a conversation and it's not like you have to say that outright, but people can sense it.
yeah.
If you're really trying to help them solve an issue versus just trying to either save yourself or quell it or anything like that.
Yeah, and the reality is we have so many people that we deal with during the day. We have so many different situations, and we have this is something that people I think miss sometimes, and I don't want to suggest that anybody is less emotionally intelligent than others, but we all miss being triggered a lot, and we walk around triggered out of our awareness, and we get frustrated with the day, and we get frustrated with people, and we get frustrated with traffic, and we get frustrated with things that are falling apart or seem to be falling apart because they're not going the way we wanted them to. And so we live in this perpetual, am I going to be encouraged or discouraged? Am I going to be gratified or am I going to be disappointed? And we live in this, and then trying to have the relationships. And the reality is we miss a lot of times we're triggered. And sometimes, shoot, I'm triggered about something completely different, but I take it out on you because you said something that reminded me of the situation. Now I'm upset. And I don't know it because it's unconscious, it's out of my awareness. But if we're not able to identify what's going on with us, and we're not able to identify what's going on with other people, that's where the tumultuousness of relationships comes in, and it makes business a lot harder, it makes relationships a lot harder, and it makes life a lot less fun. And so for me, that skill is super important, and I'm a very big believer in not just uh, I don't think that we're on a different team. I think that we're in a different position on the team. And sometimes people feel like we're on a separate team because you want this and I want that. That doesn't make you on a separate team. It makes you have a different goal within the same team. And so I'm looking at this goal, you're looking at this goal. It doesn't mean we're on different teams. It means we're on the same team focused on a different goal. Which one's more priority right now? Because the overall goal is to not have the separation and to actually complete whatever project it is, or complete the transaction, or complete the movement forward, whatever it might be. And if we start to feel like we're on different teams, not just having different goals on, like a basketball team, there's some people that are really focused on defense, and there's some people that are the scorers or the shooters that are focused much more on offense. But the overall goal is to win the game. But you're sitting there focused on making sure we're defending right, when I'm not necessarily a good defender, but I'm really good at shooting. And so I'm the shooter. Then I'm not going to do much as far as defense. I can't stop somebody. I'm bad at stopping people. But I can when I get in position. But I can't get mad at you because you're not the shooter where I am. And if you get mad at me because I'm not playing defense, it's not my strong suit. We're on the same team doing different things. And I think that that's one of the things that we want to really focus on with our clients is they're in a different position on the team. And so if they're feeling like they're not being teammates, it's really they have a different agenda, they have a different position on the team. And when we can bring it back to how are we on the same team, that's where we start to develop what you were talking about, and you're really good at it. And I really like to see that growth that you've had even since I started working together with you, because it's amazing when people can grab that and develop that skill of connection with people to a level that we don't really run into problems too much. And if there is a problem, we solve it really quickly, and we build stronger relationships because of it. And it's just amazing to watch. And so, every week I talk to you. Every time we have a conversation, you tell me about one of these things that you guys had, and you got through. It's just amazing to see, and that growth. And I think that more people could benefit from thinking about how they and maybe you have a difference of opinion here, probably not, but I think that if people actually step back and looked at how they are with their relationships, whether they're personal relationships or business relationships, and how understanding they're trying to be, they get a lot further with what they're doing. Um, what do you think?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think just that attitude of really separating the issue not only from yourself, but even from the other person is super critical in getting aligned. I mean, ultimately, you want to be aligned with the other person to solve the issue. And, um, to your point before, it reinforces the relationship. It can be a blessing in disguise. And that's why I think it makes you closer with other people is like when you've experienced that before, dealing with problems, right? They say like with married couples, they fight, the fights happen often, but when you have the strategy to navigate the conflict, you get used to that and you practice it over and over, it builds a connection. And when it comes like to, with clients, like for instance, this client I was just speaking about, well, if there's another issue, it's going to be much easier to address it because we've been there before. It's almost not that you want to go out looking for conflict per se, but there is a silver lining in having to address conflict with someone that can make them a stronger client than somebody that everything went perfect with. So it's just a different frame of thinking about it, less like an annoyance, but more as an opportunity for growth.
Yeah, yeah, and unfortunately, we live in a world that we miss each other's points sometimes, and we have different importances, and we have different things that trigger us, and what I in the psychological world talk about is personality vulnerabilities as well as historical vulnerabilities and situational vulnerabilities where we've been hit and we protect against them, and we all have different ones. And if we don't honor the fact that all of our experience is different from each other's, um, we get upset instead of curious. And it's really, I was talking to another friend of mine, just a amazing spiritual dude yesterday, and he talked about the idea of, and I'm going to use his words because it was an amazing point. But if we're colors and you're blue and I'm yellow and somebody else is red, I can't go and think about our experiences as yellow and red because that creates orange. And then you ask me about them, and I go, oh well, this orange because you're blue. My experience with you is going to be a green experience because blue and yellow make green. But blue and red don't make the orange that I make, or purple, or whatever. So my experience with that person is never going to be the same as your experience with that person, and your experience with me is never going to be the same as somebody else's experience with me. And we have to honor the fact that we don't know what that experience is like, so we have to go and experience them ourselves and be curious about what that is instead of have this idea about them and stick with it because we've created that experience. And in fact, for me, I can't ever think that the experience I have today with you is going to be the same one that I have tomorrow or the next day or the next day, because each one of us is a new person each day. We have the experience of yesterday along with all of those vulnerabilities we had before. And so we have to be open to and curious about each other. And I think that, on a grander scale, if we got more curious about people instead of allowing our biases to rule our interactions, we'd have a very different world.
I agree.
So I think when you got somebody that's upset, that's a client of yours, or a prospective client, or even a friend, and you got a problem, I think what would you say the answer is? We'll give a little 30-second idea of the answers.
To address an issue with
Yeah,
or conflict.
yeah. Now you're one, two, threes.
Yeah. Well, I think you want to make the person feel understood, identify the issue, separate the issue from both yourself and the other person, and keep the focus on how to solve the issue together instead of separate. Align the interests. And remind them. 'Cause sometimes people forget. People for again, everybody wants to be understood. Not many people consciously seek to understand as much as they are to want to be understood. So you can play into that. Don't try to get them to understand you. It's not a winning game. But that's what I would say. I'd
Yeah,
say, yeah. How would you sum that up? Yeah, help them feel heard, identify the issue, and then align yourself with the other person to tackle the issue.
yeah. And the way I would put it might not be as eloquent, but really, for me, the first thing is identify what's going on with you really quick, and pay attention. Do a little internal identification of what's happening, and regulate a little bit, and then get really curious about what their experience is. Because here's the thing, for me, I go in seeing things a different way than the other person, no matter who it is. I have my point of view. They have a different point of view. And if I think I'm right, I'm probably wrong. I might not be wrong on the issue, but I might be wrong from my point of view. And so, what we got to do is we got to examine points of view and understand what they've been seeing to get clarity around the point of view. And then there's understanding and clarity. And so, for me, what I like to do in that process of de-escalating a client is ask them what their experience is, hear them, and then ask them more questions until I get an understanding of where they're coming from, and then see how I can explain where I'm coming from in a way that is really appreciative of what they're experiencing. And so it's very much like what you're talking about, and taking the issue, putting it on the table, and go, okay, that's the issue. What's your experience of it? Here's my experience of it. How am I wrong about my experience? And how are you right about what you're talking about? And maybe is there a mid ground that we come to as a result? And it's really a understanding of the interaction. Um, and I tell you what, if you just slow down and ask more questions, you're going to solve a lot of problems.
Right.
So anyway, that's what we got for you this week, and we will see you next week. Similar time, same day. Actually, you know what? Now that I say that, not thinking about it, we may be doing Friday instead because I have an engagement that I'm going to be at. So you heard it the same time as Kevin, Friday.
Perfect.